around the world. We have wonderful international attendance. I see faces from all across the United States. I know that we have families who are newly diagnosed with a lot of hope in your hearts for the research that Dr. Pichard is going to talk with us about today. And we have families who have been traveling this journey for a while and have participated in the many trials that she is going to discuss. We thank you for being trailblazers who have participated in trials or are in the middle of participating in a trial. And I know for our younger and newer families that you are really looking forward to the day when you too can participate, and we're going to present some opportunities for you. So thanks for joining us. I have a few updates from RettSyndrome.org that I'd like to make before we proceed. Our education programming could not happen without the generosity of our sponsors, especially in this year when many fundraisers have had to be canceled or postponed. So we'd really like to thank Acadia Pharmaceuticals, Greenwich Biosciences, and Neuron for supporting our educational programming. We do believe that everything about Rett syndrome should be made available at no cost to those who wish to avail themselves of it. And in thanks to these sponsorships, in addition to everybody's fundraising efforts, we are able to bring this material to you today and every month at no charge. And we are all right in the midst of celebrating October Rett Syndrome Awareness Month. So it has thrilled me to no end to see the hashtag #OverpowerRett trending across social media. And if you haven't begun participating in October Rett Syndrome Awareness Month, it is not too late. It is our time to shine. Nobody cares more about Rett syndrome than we do, and we are a rare disease. So it is the efforts of ourselves to really make a difference and raise awareness with our elected officials, with our communities, with our schools, with our family and friends, and no better time than in October. We have created some tremendous materials that we encourage you to borrow, to use, to make it easier for you to tell your story. So use your voice, join with us with some of our virtual fundraising events, share the materials. We have 31 days of Rett facts on rettsyndrome.org/October. So please visit, please participate. We have merchandise, we have tattoos, we have live Facebook events that you can share, and social media is the best avenue right now. So please get involved and talk about your family. Add your personal story to each one of the facts. Nothing drives it home more than to make yourself known in your community and make the story of how Rett syndrome has impacted your child and your family and your excitement for hope, for research to take traction with your personal story. So please take advantage of all of that and get involved with October. Next, I'd like to remind everybody that the Rett Syndrome Communication Guidelines is published and available. This plays very nicely into our 360 view of Rett syndrome research that we have to invest in everything from basic to translation to neurohabilitation. The Rett Syndrome Guidelines are the culmination of 5 years of research study with over 600 participants, professional and families from around the world. And this is a great guide. I think I have a copy of it that I'll show you in a minute. It's not overwhelming. It has strategies to optimize engagement, how to do an assessment, how to do an AAC assessment, very different from doing a communication assessment, and how to choose the right AA system or device for your child. This is an incredible guidebook that we have had feedback from AAC specialists, speech language pathologists, and educators. Has been an accelerator for them working with your children with Rett syndrome. And it'll be a really practical guide for you yourself as you begin the journey of Rett syndrome communication or to advance you along the path that you're already on. So get your hands on the Rett Syndrome Guidelines. I have some more updates that I'm going to share at the end of our time together, but I really don't want to take any more time away from Dr. Pichard. So if we can, I'm going to go ahead and ask Dr. Pichard to bring up her slides. Tell us a little bit about yourself, if you would, and all the wonderful things that we have ahead of us for research. And I think you're on mute. There we go.
Now I think I'm off. Thank you so much, Paige, and thank you for giving us that introduction, reminding us about October awareness and the things that we can participate in. And I'm excited to talk a little bit about clinical trials, as well as a new program that we have launched. Now, Paige, am I showing my screen? Paige, I just want to confirm that my screen is visible.
It is. Yeah, we can see your slides.
Thank you. All right. So today, as we talk about clinical trials, I want to start off by introducing you to the Rett Research Ready program. If you're not already aware, this was a program that we launched over the summer, but I feel like we should go through and really give an introduction and a walkthrough so that you can understand how to use this tool. After we go through that Rett Research Ready program, I'm going to give an update on the clinical trials that are currently ongoing, as well as upcoming trials that we know of as of right now. So Rett Research Ready, sorry, let me move this box. Rett Research Ready is a program that we launched in July, and this is a program that we felt would better prepare our community for clinical trial readiness. We're at a time where there is so much positive news coming out about advances that are being made in the science to better understand and better find treatments for Rett syndrome. But ultimately, every single one of those groundbreaking advancements needs to be tested in a clinical trial. So the clinical trial is how we will get to a point where we actually have medicines that we can pick up at the pharmacy or go to the hospital to get as a treatment. So the clinical trials are such a critical part of our journey to get us to a world without Rett syndrome. So this Rett Research Ready tool is on our website, and what it does is it allows you as a potential participant in clinical research to feel more educated and empowered so that you can make the best decision for you and your family as to whether it is appropriate for you to participate in clinical research. So really, we felt that this was just a strategic extension of our investment in research. It is part of that continuum, and we know that without a community ready to participate in clinical trials, we'll never get to that world without Rett. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go over to the website and I'm going to walk you through it. So let's just give this a minute to connect. So when you follow that link, the rettsyndrome.org Rett Research Ready, it brings you to this website. And Paige, sorry, can you confirm that the website is visible?
No, we're still seeing your slide, Dominique.
Okay, yeah.
Try clicking on the link again. If not, might need to just copy and paste it into your browser. And I'll remind everyone that if you have questions for Dr. Pichard, you can go ahead and type them into the chat. We are recording today's session, so you'll be able to refer back to it.
Paige, it says that screen sharing is paused. I apologize for this glitch.
Okay. If you go into screen sharing and unclick pause, it should play. There we go.
Are we on it now? Okay.
Yeah, we sure are.
So here we are. So this is www.rettsyndrome.org, Rett Research Ready. And when you come to this website, what you'll see is this header that gives you the different areas you can click down to. But I want to start off by sharing this video.
We dream big. Our Rett syndrome community is united in dedication to help and heal our loved ones with Rett. RettSyndrome.org stands with you today and works to transform your tomorrow through investment in all areas of research. We're advancing toward a cure for Rett. Clinical trials offer a promising path to discover new treatments and bring us closer to a cure. Each family needs knowledge and understanding to determine if they are ready to participate in research. We equip you with accurate and timely information as you explore clinical trials and other types of research. We can help you and your family to be Rett research ready. You'll find My Rett Trial Finder at RettSyndrome.org. It's a central place with what you need to understand the research process and explore clinical trials and other research options. To get started, click on My Rett Trial Finder. By answering the questions, you'll discover trials that are relevant for your loved one. You can review your search results and then talk with your care team about whether a specific study is a good fit. When you're ready, you can even connect directly to sites with open studies to let them know your interest in being a study volunteer. We all share the same vision, a world without Rett. Your participation in research helps make that vision a reality, and we thank you. Together, we support those living with Rett syndrome today and reach toward a cure for tomorrow.
Great. So I hope that everyone was able to see that video. So now I'm just going to go down through the site just to show you different features that you can find on the site. First, I'm going to go through some of these areas of just education. So there is some information on what are the types of research. And when you click on Know More, it opens up a window to explain the different types of research. How are new therapies developed? This is a really important process to understand. You know, we always hear and we always feel, you know, why don't we have those treatments today? Why does this take so long? And if you have an understanding of how the process works with the regulations and the technology that we have today, it'll give you an understanding of why this feels like it takes so long. And really, ultimately, the answer is because we need to know that these treatments are safe before they are approved. Then there's information on clinical trial phases. So you may be familiar with the different phases, or you may be more new to this and want to understand what it means if it's a phase 2 or a phase 3 trial. Importantly, we have this section, what to expect, your rights and protections. And I want you to remember that as a clinical trial or a clinical research participant, you're a volunteer. You really are doing this. It is a research study. And while there is benefit to those who participate, especially in drug trials, there's the potential of benefit. It is a research study. And so there are rights that you have and protections. And so we want you to understand that and know how to inquire about what your rights and protections are. We're going to get to the My Rett Trial Finder, which is a really exciting part of this program. But before we get there, I want to scroll past and show you just a couple more pieces. So right here we have on the left a section called Start the Conversation, what to ask before participating in research. This is a collection of questions that you may want to look through and ask your provider or your research team before you agree to participate in research. It's questions that people sometimes may not even know to ask or may forget to ask. So it can be something that you easily print, bring with you, and ask those questions that are important to you or relevant to you and your family. We also have a FAQ section, glossary about clinical trial and clinical research terms, as well as a section on trial conclusion, what to expect as a study ends. Because as I said, this is a research study. Even when it's a clinical trial and your family member may be getting a study drug, at some point that study will end. And so what to expect when that study does end and the process before a drug is potentially approved. Finally, we have this section called Clinical Trial News, where as clinical trial sponsors provide updates to the community, we collect them here so that you can go and look at all of the clinical trial news that's available. So now I'm going to go back to this section called My Rett Trial Finder. This is a part that I'm really excited about because this ends up being a one-stop shop where you can come to find out about what trial opportunities or what research opportunities are available for your loved one with Rett syndrome. I will preface it to say that any drug studies are pulled from clinicaltrials.gov. Now that is a United States government website. It is mandated that any drug trial in the United States be registered on clinicaltrials.gov, but that is not an international mandate, which means that studies that are conducted outside of the United States may be in clinicaltrials.gov, but are not required to be. And therefore, we can't say that this is a comprehensive tool for international studies, but you will see that there are some international sites and international studies that are included. So this trial finder is a way for you, as I mentioned, it's a one-stop shop. So if you're interested to see if there are studies that your child or your loved one could participate in, this is where you can find out what studies are going on. So let me give a little bit of an overview. So here what you see is a circle that says 17 trials found. Now what this means is that there are 17 different research studies, both drug studies as well as non-drug clinical research studies that are available through this trial finder. So one way is to just click on the trials found, 17 trials found, and it'll pull up everything. So that's one way to do it if you just want to see everything at once. But this My Rett Trial Finder gives you a few options. Guide me from start to finish, which is what we're going to go through in just a few minutes. The next option is I want to search on my own. If you click I want to search on my own and go to next, it's the equivalent of you selecting the round purple circle that says 17 trials found. The third option is I want to sign up as a volunteer. Now, if you click next on this, what it does is it pulls a site for you, and it's a volunteer sign up. And this is through CenterWatch, who's our partner in launching this My Rett Trial Finder. In this volunteer sign up, you include your name, contact info, the condition that you're interested in. So you put Rett syndrome, gender and date of birth of the person for whom you're interested in the study, as well as location. And then you register as a volunteer. What that notification does is it then will send you email notifications when new studies that meet the criteria that you put, so new studies for Rett syndrome, are included in the trial finder. That way you don't have to always be coming back and looking for new studies, but you'll get a notification. So now that we've gone through this first screen, I'm going to do this first option, guide me from start to finish. So you just go ahead and click next. Now these next three screens are part of CenterWatch's information on clinical trials. So what you can see is this is some background information on what is a clinical trial. And you hit continue. This second screen talks a little bit about why to participate in a clinical trial. And then the third screen is what happens during a clinical trial. So these are all preloaded by CenterWatch, and so you'll see those every time you go through the guided search. So next you get to a screen that says, where do you live? And the reason that it's asking you this is because you can filter the results based on where you live. Even if you don't want to filter, it's still going to make you answer that. So let's put in, we're in Cincinnati, Ohio, and how far are you willing to travel? Well, I want to know about everything right now, so I'm going to click the entire world. So now we're going to go to next. Now you see we still have 17 trials found. So next it's going to ask, what is the age of the individual with Rett syndrome for whom you are interested in learning about trials? So now if we said the age is 2 to 18 years of age, you see there's going to be 14 available results. If you say more than 18, it's going to say 13, less than 2 years old, 5 trials available. And I'm going to pause here just to remind everyone that this is both drug trials as well as non-drug trials, which includes natural history study and other types of studies that we're going to talk about. I'm going to go ahead and select I'm not sure, include all available trials, which would include all 17. So it's not going to filter out any trials based on age. So now the next question is the individual with Rett syndrome female or male? Again, this is to be able to filter out studies. So if it is a male with Rett syndrome, it's not going to give you the trials that only allow females. But for the sake of this, let's go through and say, I'm not sure, include all available trials. The next question, has this individual with Rett syndrome been on stable medication for Rett syndrome, which would include seizure medications or supplements? And this is because some of the trials require stable medication history for at least 4 weeks to participate in the clinical trial. So again, if you answered no, it's going to filter out some of those studies. And if you answer yes, it'll include them. So let's just say, I'm not sure, include them all, just so that we can keep moving with all of them. Another question, has it been 6 or more months since loss of hand use or verbal language or gross motor regression? Same thing, we'll just say, I'm not sure, because I don't want to filter any out right now. Does the individual with Rett syndrome suffer from any liver or kidney impairment? If you said yes, that's going to limit the trials because some may have an exclusion criteria based on the safety of the drug that they are trying. So again, we're going to hit I'm not sure. Does the individual with Rett syndrome have a diagnosis of Rett syndrome with mutation of MECP2 gene confirmed through genetic testing? And the reason that this is important is because many of the drug trials do require both a diagnosis, a clinical diagnosis of Rett syndrome, as well as confirmation with the MECP2 gene mutation. So again, we'll hit I'm not sure and move on. So now we've gotten to the end, and it's asking how we want to see the trial results displayed. So there's 2 ways to look at them. One is by nearest location. As you recall, we put that we're in Cincinnati. So it's going to start with the ones that are closest to Cincinnati. And the other option is by most recently added trials. So we're going to start with most recently added trials. So as you can see, it says found 17 matching clinical trials being conducted at 96 locations. You can contact study sites using send email or call now buttons. So what you see here is the first trial, the first study to be available. This is a study being conducted. It's run through Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And what you see on the first line is the title of the study. So when you look at this tool, it's always going to put the location first, and then in the paragraph, the first sentence of it is the name of the study. So this is a study that is not a drug trial. This is a survey on the impact of COVID-19 on people living with rare diseases and their families. And I want to highlight this one as well as the next 2 are studies that are not drug trials. But these are research opportunities that researchers have contacted us and said, can you share our research study with your community? Because they are either directly related to Rett, or Rett is one of the conditions which is eligible for this study. So what you see here is the beginning of a description, but really to read it, you'd have to select more details. It's going to pop up this window, which will give you an eligibility age. So in this one, between the ages of 1 to 89. And then it gives you a brief summary. You can see the summary of the study that they're doing. As I mentioned, this is a survey-based study that is being conducted from NIH through their Rare Disease Consortium Research Network, which is their data management is housed at Cincinnati, which is why it's saying the location is Cincinnati. So if you were interested in this study, you select Take the Survey, and what you see is that it's going to bring you to the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network website, and it's going to explain the survey, and then I'll give you the button to take the survey, as well as a version that's in Spanish, if you would like to take this survey. And so this is a way to participate in clinical research, even if it's not a drug trial, if you're interested. We do find that many of these survey-based studies are important. So in particular, we've seen a lot of them related to COVID and people with rare diseases because of the impact that COVID is having globally, but in particular, those with rare diseases. We want our voice to be present when decisions are being made to help to influence policy. And as one of 7,000 rare diseases, just our community alone is really just a small group, but when we combine with all the rare diseases, we can really have a very powerful voice. And so that's why we've included studies such as this Impact on COVID-19 NIH study. Now, what else you see on this page is if you wanted to contact the researchers, you could send an email. Otherwise, as I said, you go to more details and you take the survey. So now we're going to go to Show Next. So as I mentioned, there are going to be 3 studies that we're starting off with that are not drug trials. So this is a second study run out of Baylor College of Medicine. This is quality of life in children and families with neurodevelopmental disorders during COVID-19. So similar to the NIH study, this is trying to understand the impact of COVID-19, although this is on those with neurodevelopmental disorders, many of which are rare diseases. So it's similarly trying to understand the impact. So just like before, we would click more details. It gives you the eligibility age. So this is the age of your child with Rett syndrome. A brief summary, and if you were interested, you select Take the Survey. And you see, like with the NIH study, this brings you to the website of the research group conducting the survey. So this is the Baylor website, and you would be able to read their intro letter, and if you were interested, you follow through on their website. So now Baylor has provided both a phone number and an email. So if you were interested in contacting them directly, maybe you had questions about the survey, you wanted to give feedback, or really to understand if you were eligible, you could say call now. It brings up a pop-up that allows you to put in your phone number and your email. Then when you press call now, they say, we will first call your number, and once you answer, it then automatically dials the study site. So that's one way to contact a study group by phone. Of course, they may not be able to answer right at the moment, so you may have to leave a voicemail, but that's a way to contact them. Similarly, you could send an email. And what it does is it generates an email saying, I'm interested in learning more and participating in your clinical trial named, and it gives the name of the study. And you provide your name, your email, your phone number, and then you send the message. So that will email the study site directly so that they can then respond to you. So we're going to go to Show Next. So this is a study being conducted out of University of Tennessee Health Science Center. And this is what is called a retrospective study. So this is using information that happened in the past. We're looking kind of backwards. So they're studying differences in vocalizations of babies and toddlers with Rett syndrome and comparing them to their same-aged peers. So if you go to the more details, it tells you about which conditions are eligible, the age of eligibility of your child with Rett syndrome, the brief summary in order to better understand what it is that they're asking. So for example, you see in this is going to be a study that's conducted either by telephone or video chat. And so this is something that no matter where you live, if you were interested in participating, your child was in the right age range, and you have home video recordings from the time your child was between 6 to 18 months, then you could participate if you were interested. So these are research opportunities that you might not hear about the same way that you hear about clinical trials, but they're really important studies, and it gives you an opportunity to participate in research even if you are not able to participate in a clinical trial, whether it's because your loved one with Rett syndrome is not eligible or the study centers are too far away, it's too hard for you to get to them. So this is another way for you to be able to contribute if you want to contribute to the research meaningfully. So those are the three that I mentioned are research studies that are not the clinical trials that we've recently added. Now, we're gonna see studies that are in clinicaltrials.gov. So as you go through, you're gonna see this is biobanking of Rett syndrome, and it's gonna list the different locations. So this is a study that's part of the natural history study. And so you could see the different locations where it's being held. And actually what we're gonna do is we're gonna go, what I would like to show you, I don't wanna go all the way back through. We're gonna go to this button of all locations. Oops. I'm gonna say view all. I apologize, I got too far. Well, we'll go through, which is what I was gonna do. Just look at it by location rather than by which study was added most recently. And these are just different ways to approach the tool. And it's really the first time that you do it, you're gonna be learning what's in there and what's of interest to you and your family. These are the same questions we answered before. And again, I'm just including all the studies. So now we're going to say by nearest location. All right, so now it's same thing, found 17 matching clinical trials conducted at 96 locations. And so now, rather than looking at the most recently added, we're looking at them by location. So we had said we're in Cincinnati, so it's looking at the ones that are closest to Cincinnati. And what you can see here is this is a clinical trial, a drug study that is being conducted. In fact, I'll tell you about this study. They've actually completed their enrollment, but still, if you look on clinicaltrials.gov, it is remains open, which is why we have it in this tool still. Like in those other studies, you can look at more details. It'll give you an eligibility age. It'll tell you what the treatments that are being given, as well as a brief summary. Much like in those other studies, you can either select call now or send an email if you're interested. Now, the send email and call now, it depends on how the different sponsors have elected to set this up. So there's some studies that your email will go directly, let's say, to Cincinnati Children's Hospital team that is conducting the Antivax trial. And then there's other sponsors who have chosen to have the email go to them, and then they distribute it directly to the sites. So again, this is just to show that we're staying in Cincinnati, and now it's showing the next clinical trial, the Lavender study, which was Trophinotide. Natural history study, and so on. So I then want to show, when we go to view all, what this does is it allows you to filter without going through all those questions. So if you had just selected all of the clinical trials, it would bring you to this site where you would put in your location. Again, you decide, you can choose how far away you want to look, but you could specifically look for a title. So let's say you wanted to look for Trophinotide. Now it's going to pull up the studies that are related to Trophinotide. Additionally, I want to highlight the section where it says phase. So if the phase is unknown, this would be studies that are not drug trials. So for example, the natural history study is not a phase 2 or 3 study. Those research studies that I showed you that are either surveys or the speech study, those are not drug trials, so they're not going to be listed as phases. So if you're interested in non-drug trials, you can select on unknown. Or if you want to know what phase 2 or phase 3 studies are ongoing, you can select on those. There are little things that we're working with CenterWatch to work out. So for example, on study type, interventional means there's some intervention being provided. Now that intervention could be therapy, that intervention could be a drug. Those are considered interventional. But right now, it prevents you from selecting that. So please know that that's something that we're working with CenterWatch to fix. An observational study would be a study that doesn't have an intervention. For example, the natural history study. So that was the overview that I wanted to give you on the Rett Research Ready program. I hope that by seeing this, you now have an understanding of how this can work and what it will provide you when you go through how you can filter or select to not filter. It can feel overwhelming if you go to just the found 17 matching clinical trials at 96 locations, because you would really see every location for every site. And so it feels like there's a lot in there. So using the filters can help you narrow down a little bit better. But I also hope that you explore the site, use some of the educational resources so that you feel better informed and better prepared for participating in clinical trials. All right, so with that, we're going to go back to the PowerPoint. Okay. So what are the updates for our ongoing clinical trials that are occurring in the US? So we're just going to go through each trial that is currently still ongoing. So cannabidiol oral solution, or CBD-OS. This is a phase 3 trial. It is being conducted at multiple sites, or what we call a multi-site trial, which means that there are many different sites that are enrolling participants. It is currently in recruiting status. They need to achieve 252 study participants to be fully enrolled. So just now that we had many of our clinical trials impacted by COVID-19, I'm just gonna comment, as all of our trials are now in this recruiting phase again, where they are with reopening. So the cannabidiol study currently has 2 sites open in the US. and the rest of them are in the process of reopening. So they had to shut down for COVID reasons, and as they ensure the safety of the study participants, it's taken a while for each individual site to get the approval to open back up. But as I mentioned, 2 of the US sites have reopened, and the GW Pharmaceuticals team has assured us that the rest of them are in the process of reopening and will be open in the near future. So for eligibility, this is one of the most exciting things that I'm excited to share with you today. Sorry about all the excitement. You've seen exciting so many times. This study is now open to both females and males with mutations in MECP2. This is the first drug trial open in the United States that is available to males. I can barely hold my enthusiasm back. This has been something that we have been asking pharmaceutical companies to consider inclusion of males. There are reasons that the pharmaceutical companies have not included males in the past, but GW Pharmaceuticals did make the decision to include males. So as of now, males with mutations in MECP2 will be eligible to enroll in the cannabidiol studies. So to participate, your loved one with Rett syndrome would have to be between the ages of 2 to 18 and must weigh at least 9 kilograms. Now, there are other criteria that they would have to meet, as well as medical evaluations, but these are just very basic eligibility criteria that I wanted to share. So next is the Trophinotide Lavender study. This is also a phase 3 trial, also being conducted at multiple sites. Now, phase 3 trials are the last phase of a study that is conducted before a pharmaceutical company can ask the FDA to review all of the data from the studies to consider approval of a medication. And so because of that, it is usually a larger study. As you can see, this study is requiring 184 participants, and therefore really does require multiple sites to be included in order to reach that enrollment. So Trophinotide is also back to recruiting. Almost all of their sites have reopened. As of this week, I believe that there was just one more site left to reopen. So that is enrolling again. For eligibility, this is for females with classic Rett and a mutation in MECP2. The age range is 5 to 20 years old. And in order to be eligible, your child would have to have stable seizures or no seizure history. And what exactly stable seizures means would be a discussion that you would have with the research team at the time of either before having your screening visit or during that screening visit to make sure that it's meeting their definition of stability. Triheptinoen. This is a single site study. So this is a study being done at the Center for Rare Neurologic Diseases in Georgia. It is open for recruiting. The goal is 12 participants, as this is a pilot study. And there is Dr. Dan Tarquinio is the principal investigator, and he said there is room for one more participant to reach that 12. So this is for females with classic Rett and a mutation in MECP2 who are at least 2 years or older. And in order to participate, your child has to have seizures and be on at least one anti-seizure medication. Ketamine. This is another multi-site study. It is currently recruiting with a goal of 48 participants. And I confirmed this week that all sites have reopened. For eligibility, this is females with Rett and a mutation in MECP2, ages 6 to 12, and generally healthy. And again, this would be something that a discussion with the study team to understand further eligibility criteria. Anavex is another clinical trial. So Anavex 273 was a multi-site clinical trial in the United States that actually their enrollment is now complete. They put out a notification to the community in September that they met their enrollment goal of 21 participants. In fact, they said they exceeded that enrollment goal. They have communicated that their data analysis is underway, and they expect to have their results to be publicly available by the end of 2020. So we can expect to hear about that Anavex study in the next couple of months. Now, this was a study, also females with classic Rett and a mutation in MECP2, but this was for adults. So it had to be between the ages of 18 to 45 years. So those are the current trials. And I want to just take a pause and talk about what is our role in clinical trials. So what does RettSyndrome.org do to help make these clinical trials the best trials that they could be? We really represent the patient voice to pharmaceutical companies. So what does this mean? We meet early and we meet often with companies. Sometimes we meet with companies when they are testing their compound in animals. Sometimes we meet with companies even before that, when they have a drug of interest. Either they approach us or we approach them and say, we think that your molecule would potentially be of interest in Rett syndrome. And we walk with them in the journey. We help them understand the animal studies in the context of what we know. They're not experts in Rett syndrome, that we are. And so we provide that expertise to them. We share our priorities with them. When they're ready to go to clinical trials, we tell them what's important to our families. For example, male inclusion. And as I mentioned earlier, that cannabidiol study was able to make a change to their protocol to include males, which we are so thankful for. And really, it's that continued advocacy for what it is that you in our community need. We provide guidance on trial design. So we actually will see the trial protocol early on and provide feedback to them on what are the best ways to measure, what are the best ways to design the trial so that families feel that they can participate. And that leads me to the next bullet, an advisory committee of parents to provide input to Pharma. We know that no one knows better than a parent of someone with Rett syndrome what it takes in daily life. We know that a parent is going to be the best person to be able to say, that's not going to be feasible for many of us who have a loved one with Rett syndrome. So we've developed this advisory committee of parents who can provide that input. And I'll tell you an example of how this actually panned out to be really beneficial. We've done this several times with pharmaceutical companies when they ask us to. And in one relatively recent example, a company had asked us to put together an advisory committee. We did. And from that, they learned that it would be really helpful for parents to have the option to not travel to all of the study visits. Just the burden of that travel can be really quite impactful. And so therefore, the pharmaceutical company heard this feedback, and when they designed their trial, they said of all of the study visits, there's certain ones that have to be done in person, but there's some of them that could be done from home, meaning someone comes to the house to draw blood and a telehealth visit with the study team to conduct the medical evaluation. And that was directly from feedback that came from this advisory committee. And then in the setting of COVID-19, this was a really great thing for this company to be able to switch to remote visits. So their clinical trial wasn't impacted the same way so many clinical trials around the world were impacted, because they could pivot and make remote trials part of their their continued study so that they were able to continue enrolling. And finally, we also will accompany Pharma to FDA meetings. Again, just like pharmaceutical companies are not experts at all in Rett syndrome, neither is the FDA. Now, we at RettSyndrome.org do our best to educate people at the FDA about Rett syndrome, but this is another way that we can be there with the pharmaceutical companies when meeting with the FDA to help to provide that patient voice. We know that the patient voice is so important in drug development, and we're here to help facilitate that. So on that note, we're going to go to the last couple slides on upcoming clinical trials. So we had shared with the community that a company that had previously been known as Avexis, which is now Novartis Gene Therapies, has restarted their Rett syndrome program. So a communication dated on August 20th of this year was released by Novartis Gene Therapies, which we shared with the community. And it said really just that they are restarting their program. They had to take a pause to do some additional preclinical work. We're working closely with Novartis. We're there with them in all the ways that I just mentioned to help make sure that what the clinical trial looks like is the best for the families. Now, Novartis Gene Therapies has shared an anticipated start date in 2021 for their clinical trial, but timelines can change. So while they anticipate that to be started in 2021, things can change. We certainly know that COVID had such an impact on clinical trials worldwide, disease-wide, and so there may be unanticipated delays in initiating their clinical trial. And finally, there's a newly formed company, Taysha Gene Therapies. And this company actually is based on the science from Dr. Stephen Gray. Some of you may be familiar with Dr. Stephen Gray. We at RettSyndrome.org we funded him for years. In fact, when he was doing his postdoc, so after he finished his PhD, he was in a postdoc, which is a mentored position before you have your own independent lab. And as he was finishing his postdoc, we funded him as an early investigator, mentor trainee research fellowship. And then as an early investigator, kept funding him because we knew the science that he was working on was really some excellent work. And here it has now resulted in a new company called Taysha Gene Therapy. So Taysha Gene Therapy has partnered with UT Southwestern, which is where Dr. Stephen Gray is now. And they anticipate applying to the FDA for a clinical trial in 2021. Again, there may be further delays. When they say they anticipate applying to the FDA, it does not mean that a clinical trial will necessarily be ready to start in 2021. It is just the first step that has to be taken. So the FDA actually has to say, yes, you're allowed to start testing your therapeutic in humans. And they don't take that lightly. They look at all of the data from animals and from any other human trials using the same drug before they make that decision. So again, we are in communication with Taysha. We are there to help guide the development of this program to make sure that it really is in the best interest of those living with Rett syndrome so that we can have the best trial moving forward. So I am going to pause there for some questions. Now, Paige, would you like me to go through first the questions that we received in advance?
Yeah, Dominique, that would be great. I know that you answered a lot of those questions in your slides, but they are the questions that are of topmost interest in people's minds. So feel free to refer back to a slide if you need to, or give us more information if you feel like you want to expand on it a little bit more based on the questions asked.
Okay, great. Good, and also please feel free to ask any additional questions that may have come up, questions that you had coming into this that you felt weren't answered yet, and we will certainly try to answer as many questions as we can. So there are questions on, does a severity or level of function play a role in determining whether or not the patient is a good candidate for a trial? And that's a great question, and it really depends on the trial itself. So when you look at, actually, it's not even going to be something that you may be able to tell through the eligibility that's available on clinicaltrials.gov. And so you'll have to actually contact the study sites to get some more information about the study if you're interested in participating in a clinical trial. So there was a comment, location and connection to a trial clinical site seems like it pulls a lot of weight as to whether or not your child is accepted into a trial. And it's frustrating to hear we need you, but not get accepted or not even hear a response from the site. I hear you. It is really hard to want to have your child in a trial and not hear back from the study site or feel like other people are getting priority for other reasons that are out of your control. Know that the clinical sites want to do what's best for our community, but know that they also sometimes get behind. You know, we do our best, certainly when we hear from the community and from families that maybe they haven't heard back. We try to contact sites as well. We are very close-knit with the clinicians, the Rett syndrome clinicians that run the Rett clinics nationwide, most of which are study sites. And so we do our best to be your voice and to let them know when there are families that aren't hearing back. Don't give up. Don't give up hope. We're all human, and they want you to be able to have a chance to enroll. So please do feel free to contact them again. And if you're not hearing back, please let us know, and we will do what we can to advocate on your behalf. Are there any clinical trials that are going to be having adults? My daughter's 28 years old. So the Anavex trial that, as I mentioned, has already completed their enrollment was an adult study. Trophinotide goes up to 20, so just barely adult. So right now, the rest of the studies are pediatric in range, but that may change. Who's eligible for a clinical trial based on age is something that the companies decide based on the drug that they're trying, as well as what safety data is known about the drug. So they may start in adults and then study children, or they may be able to start with children right away. What are the clinical trials available for a 5-year-old? I hope that you saw that through the presentation. So questions about the Trophinotide trial in particular. So please update on where the Trophinotide stands. Our daughter participated in 2013 at Texas Children's Hospital. So this is where understanding the drug development timeline is really helpful. So we're at the point of clinical trials, which 2013 to now seems eternal, and it is a long time. But those initial studies were what we call phase 2 studies. So they were really to better understand the safety of the drug in different populations. So there was a phase 2 study in adults, and there was a phase 2 study in kids. And then they needed to review all that data and get FDA approval before they could move to the phase 3 study, which is where we are now. So this takes a long time. I mentioned where we are, that they are currently actively recruiting and need to get to 184 participants to have that phase 3 study completed. So a question about when is that phase 3 study expected to be complete? You know, COVID has really thrown timelines out the window. And so it depends on volunteers that are willing to travel to study sites and participate in clinical trials, as well as the study sites being open at full capacity for research activities. So unfortunately, you know, we can't give an exact timeline on when that phase 3 study will be complete. There's another comment where they were contacted by a particular site to see if they were interested, and now several weeks have gone by and they haven't heard back from that site. So as I mentioned earlier, I encourage you to reach back out, and if you are not hearing anything, please reach out to us. We will advocate on your behalf as much as we can. Timelines for results. So several questions on, I have a young child, what's a realistic time frame for significant treatment, or how close are we to a cure, are we any closer? Will there ever be a cure for Rett syndrome? So timelines with clinical studies are hard to predict. You know, as I've mentioned, COVID had a significant impact, but even before COVID, it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of resources. And I understand how hard it is to wait. I am the Chief Science Officer for RettSyndrome.org. I am a physician by training. I have a scientific background, but I'm also the parent to a 13-year-old young lady with Rett syndrome. And so I know that every passing day is a day that I don't want to be waiting any longer. But I also know that these drugs need to be tested for safety, because I don't want to put my daughter at more risk than she needs to be at. So I want these drugs to go through the appropriate safety studies as they will. And that takes time, and it's really hard to wait. And I understand and I hear you. Now, are we close to a cure? Are we any closer to a cure? Will there ever be a cure? Cure is a really tricky word. And my definition of cure might be very different from your definition of cure. For some people, cure means their child reverts back to as if they never had Rett syndrome. For some, cure means they got much, much better. For some, it means their child never even developed the symptoms of Rett syndrome. So they were treated before Rett got to take away so much from their child. So will there be a cure? We hope that there will be a day that there's a world without Rett syndrome. But we don't know when that will be. We know that science takes time. As you've seen, the work can take a decade or more. Certainly to get from a breakthrough in the lab all the way to an FDA-approved treatment can feel like an eternity. But we won't know if a transformative therapy is curative until we test it. All right, so there's questions regarding gene therapy and gene editing. So are there possible genetic cures, and what are realistic timeframes? And is there any hope for gene therapy for girls in their 30s? So this kind of goes back to that question of cure. So we know that treatments that are genetic in origin, so targeting the MECP2 gene or the MECP2 protein, are treatments that are going to have what we call they're transformative treatments. So they are more likely to have a significant result. Now, will that be a cure for someone in your 30s? Again, that goes back to what I just said. We don't know what the result will be for anyone at any age. And certainly, we don't know the timeline. So I mentioned that there are 2 potential gene therapy trials that will start in the next year or 2. So that will give us a much better indication. Do these approaches to treatment, these genetic approaches where we're replacing part of that gene, do they give us a transformative result? We'll have to see. We do know that the reason that everyone is hopeful is because of the studies that have been done in animals where symptoms have been reversed. But we know that humans aren't mice. So we need to see what it does in a human with Rett syndrome before we can say, will there be a cure, and what is a realistic time frame for cure, whatever cure means. There's a couple questions regarding males, and the rarity of males that have mutations in MECP2. And what we do know with rare diseases is when we first discover let's say a subpopulation, it's a very small group. But as genetic testing is now more readily available, we may actually see that group increase. There may be more males with MECP2 mutations out there than we know, just like people that, females that today have a diagnosis of Rett syndrome with a MECP2 mutation may not have been diagnosed with Rett syndrome before the gene was known because they didn't meet the clinical criteria. So now that the genetic testing is more widely available and it is better known that males can have a mutation in MECP2, we'll see if it is an ultra rare subpopulation or there's really more males with Rett syndrome than we are currently aware. There's a question about the Severity trial. So this was a trial that completed earlier in the year. And there was a press release that came out from the company that said that the results were negative results, meaning the drug did not show in the population that was studied that there was benefit. That is not to say that any one individual who was in the study didn't notice a benefit, but when they ran all the statistical tests, they could not prove that it was beneficial for the overall population. And so the question was if there's any detailed results. We are still waiting to get more detailed results. Neuron was doing sub-analysis to try to understand if there were subpopulations within those studied, but we don't have any of that available. There's a question regarding risks of the different study treatments. And I didn't go through risks of any of these drugs because really that's a conversation that has to happen with the provider. Risk is not only something that is due to the drug itself. So some drugs will have an inherent risk of certain medical complications, but also it depends on the person taking the drug. So what other medications is that person on? What medical conditions does that person have? And that will alter the risk profile. And so really that's a conversation that has to happen with the doctor that is going to be enrolling the participant in a clinical trial. There's another question on what is the most advanced study to treat Rett syndrome? And the most advanced are the phase 3 trials. And so that would be the cannabidiol and the Trophinotide studies are both in phase 3. So we are coming up to the end of the questions. One of them being, can someone not living in the US participate in a clinical trial in the US? It actually depends on the study. So for example, some of the studies will say that you need to be English speaking, and that's because the tools that they're using to measure the benefit are only validated in the English language. Some of the studies will say that you have to reside within the United States to participate in a US site. Some of these studies are actually conducted in multiple different countries. So for example, Anavex has sites is conducting a trial in Australia. And the cannabidiol study has sites in the UK that are listed on clinicaltrials.gov. So there certainly is the opportunity to look to see if there are international sites where someone living outside the US could participate. But if you're someone that would want to travel to and have the ability to travel to the United States, you could always request additional information to see if that particular study will allow enrollment for someone living outside of the US. There's a question on, will my niece ever have the ability to talk? She's about to be 2 years old. And how can we potty train her? We all want to hear our children talk. That is such an important part. There are some children with Rett that maintain the ability to use some verbal communication, although not as fluently as someone without Rett syndrome. But the majority of those with Rett syndrome do lose their verbal communication. That's not to say that your niece will never have the ability to talk. She just won't have the ability to talk she just may not have the ability to talk with her voice. There is technology that has allowed our children's voice to be unlocked. So there are eye gaze devices that now allow our children who couldn't have their own voice communicate much more independently than they could before this technology was available. So I certainly encourage you to work with your family to look at what are the options for augmentative communication for a child who's going to be nonverbal, to make sure that their voice is heard. And actually, there was a part of that question on how can we potty train her? And with that, I would actually like to have Paige jump in. That is not directly related to clinical trials, but I do believe Paige can share some information on that.
And Dominique, thank you. And this is really the collaborative part of our mission between accelerating research and empowering families, and knowing that these two things are connected hand in hand. So as a foundation, we truly want to help you live in the here and now and empower you today with information which will help you improve the quality of life of your child in every domain. So going to the bathroom independently is a very important one. Most of our children don't have the motor skills to actually get to the bathroom and do all of the things that are necessary, but that doesn't mean that they don't understand what it means to want to use a bathroom instead of using diapers, and they don't necessarily have the inability to hold their bodily functions until it's time. So we do have some materials that can help you in that journey. The Rett Syndrome Handbook, the Bible of Rett Syndrome, has a nice section on page, it is literally on page 255 on toileting. So it's a great index that you can reference. I also have a lovely family story that a parent shared with me of the step-by-step sort of a checklist and a tracking system that she put together to understand the signs that her daughter was able to use to tell her that she needed to go to the bathroom. And then she helped her, and over time, she got better at that skill, and now doesn't need to wear diapers or liners of any kind. And I hear those stories often with our kids, you know, and that goes back to what Dr. Pichard was saying, is that motor skills might be impaired with our children, but cognitive abilities, desires, dreams, hopes are not indicative of their motor skills. So take advantage of all the resources that we have, believe in her abilities, and if you find that you would like some expert advice on how to advance your skills, the skills in your child, let us know. We have an entire digital library of webcasts on a variety of topics, whether it's genetics and quality of life, self-care for you as parents, acquiring equipment, how to get your educators and schools on board with your plans and dreams for your child, right? Toileting will never be successful if you only try to do it at home and you don't have follow through at the school or the day program. So lean on us to help you. Keep asking these questions. It's not exactly the topic of today's webcast, but I'm really glad the question was submitted, and please keep sending them in. Okay. Thanks, Dominique. Do you have any other in your queue? We have had some questions that were written in that I'm happy to read off to you if there weren't any more from the pre-submitted list.
Yep, I had no more from the pre-submitted list.
Okay. All right, so some questions that came in based on your presentation material. Going back to the gene therapy trials, we do have an attendee who asked if you can explain a little bit more of the difference between the approach of Tasha and Novartis.
That's a great question, and something that is not yet widely known. So both of them are a gene replacement therapy. And so both of them will add MECP2 gene through a vector. And so this is what we call a viral vector. And it brings the MECP2 to the cells where it needs to be and gives the cell MECP2. So the difference between the two is something that we're still waiting to see. You know, it's just like saying, well, what's the difference between you know, Tylenol and Motrin? They both can decrease fever. They both can help with headaches and aches, but they work slightly different ways. And so how the gene therapy interacts with your cells, what exactly it does, are some of the differences between these two companies, between the two modalities for these two different companies, but they are not yet sharing specifics about their individual gene therapies.
Thank you. More to come.
Yes, it is a you know, ever expanding field, and you know, it feels like every month we learn a little bit more about these two different clinical trials that are hopefully in the near, you know, in the near future, in the next few years.
Mm-hmm. And extending that a little further, we had someone write in and ask if it would be possible to get a summary of what each drug trial hopes to accomplish, and how can families access the supporting data that's available that went into these trials, and access peer-reviewed data from the study to better assess the benefits and risks, so that you know, the company statements tend to be a little bit more general, but families, as they're weighing the different trials, how can they get access to some of the data that went into the setups?
Certainly, and that's a great question, and you know, part of being better informed. So what data is available, what data has been peer reviewed is available through something called PubMed. And Paige, maybe you could put the link for PubMed. Now, I wouldn't, you know, PubMed is a website that contains scientific and medical literature. So you can search for a particular compound that you're interested in looking up to see what data is published in peer-reviewed literature. It is scientific in nature, so it is not written for a lay audience, and it also has restricted access sometimes. So depending on who the authors are and what type of journal it was published in, you may not have access to it without paying for access. You know, when you work at an academic center or a research center, your institution buys the license to have access. So that's how that type of information is disseminated among the medical and scientific community. So that's really where you can see if there is peer-reviewed literature. Now, companies, they do not have to publish all of their data. Sometimes they consider it part of their intellectual property. We certainly encourage publication of data that goes into a clinical trial. And so we hope that the data is available for the community to be able to look at it and make those decisions. But for many of us in the community, it may not be accessible information to read and digest. And so I encourage you to have conversations with your provider, whether it is your child's primary care provider who knows your child the best, or if your child goes to see a Rett specialist, that Rett specialist to try to better understand what has been done, what previous studies were done, what were the results in those animal studies, that preclinical testing, if there were other human trials done. So for example, in Trophinotide, where they did the phase 2 trial, what were the results? Can you help me understand it? Can you help me understand what I would expect for my child, whether it's a pediatric child or an adult child with Rett syndrome? So that would be the best way to get some of that answered.
Thank you. And I think it's you know, the Rett Research Ready program and the My Trial Finder are great tools for you to sit down with your provider and share a screen and go through the materials together with your list of questions in hand. So thank you for that great orientation. We are doing well. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions, I think, before reaching the end of our time together, which of course is not the end of our time together forever, just for today's webcast. So the next question, this one particularly has to do with age of enrollment and being on wait lists. We have a parent who's concerned that they are on the wait list for a clinical trial, let's see, for Trophinotide. But with the slowdown in enrollment, she's afraid that her child is probably going to age out before they get to her and get the center reopened. Can you give some thoughts or reassurances, or if there's going to be any grace period to allow a child who was eligible at the time of pre-screening but ages out? What happens?
That's a concern, and as I've mentioned a few times, COVID really threw a wrench in clinical trials across the world, and it is impacting so many people. And so Trophinotide is one of the studies that almost all of their sites, so only one site has not yet reopened, and it is about to open. So I encourage you to reach back out to the trial site if you remain interested. Eligibility is eligibility, and it would really be up to the study sponsor, but I don't anticipate that a child who ages out while waiting would become eligible, but that is something that every study sponsor would have to answer for their own trial. So I would continue to reach out to the clinic to see about getting off the wait list, or not getting off, but get that screening visit scheduled. For many of the trials, as long as you are the age of eligibility at the time you start, you will remain eligible. So for Trophinotide, the age range is 5 to 20. If you turn 21 the day after you get your first dose, that may not be an issue. So it's when you enrolled, were you 20 years or younger?
Great, thank you so much. And I'd like to say from personal experience working with the sites, and Dr. Pichard, I don't know if you've experienced the same collaborative spirit across the sites that, especially in these times when things are disrupted and different sites are opening at different times, it's worth having a conversation if you're willing to travel. So of course you would prefer to be enrolled at the site that's nearest to you, but if you have a sense of urgency, for example, concern about your child aging out, talk to the site that you would like to be involved with and ask if they are willing to talk to another site that might be able to expedite things. They really are not competing here. They're really collaborating for the good of all of our children. Do you find that to be true?
Yes, Paige, and that's a great point. Your location doesn't have to be the limiting factor, except for the logistic factor for yourself and your family. But it's a great point. And, speaking from personal experience, we flew over 2 other clinics, 2 other Rett clinics to get to a trial site when my daughter participated in a clinical trial, because that was the site that worked out best, with timing. And so you don't have to only be at your closest clinic, although certainly the burden is less on you if it is closer to you. But it's something that you can consider, especially for someone who's worried about their daughter aging out. Are there other sites that have the ability to bring patients in now or sooner?
Thank you. And we have, we've got a few questions here in the queue that are very, very specific and very deep in terms of some of the tools that are used to assess improvement and change during trials. And I'm not sure that we have time to get into that. But I believe what you had hoped to accomplish in today's webcast was a little bit of education about clinical trials and the clinical trial process. More of an update on the actual clinical trials in the tool of the Rett Research Ready program. But in past clinical trial updates, we have oriented people about the tools that are used to assess change. Do you want to comment on that, or would you like us to take that offline and we can contribute to a QA document?
Yeah, I think what I'll say is there are, when you look on the clinicaltrials.gov website, you see their primary and secondary eligibility endpoints, and there are different tools that they use to measure each endpoint, and some of them, the list is this long for how many endpoints they're measuring. Does that speak to the fact that we don't have a perfect endpoint? Probably. But I want to share that it is a priority of ours. That is part of our clinical trial readiness priority, is to work with our researchers with the data that's available, with industry, as well as with regulators, the FDA, to really make sure that we are using the best outcome measures to measure those endpoints. And there may be more work that needs to be done so that we have better tools to measure whether a trial works or not. So I'll leave it at that. And we can always answer offline, or if it's something that's of interest, have future educational seminars on.
Great. Thank you so much. Dominique, I'm going to switch back over. There we go. To my screen, because we really are drawing down. We want to be respectful of your time. We know you have many, many meetings all day long, every day across all time zones, and we really appreciate that you are as seriously committed to communicating back to families about the strategy of RettSyndrome.org, the investment of our donor dollars, and the status of trials that don't have our name on them, but we are definitely participating and partnering with these companies to make sure that our children are at the very center of all of these trials. We appreciate such the incredible depth of information that you shared, and we know that there are hours and hours and hours of more material that you can share with us and that you will share with us in future future RettEd webcasts, blogs, newsletters, videos, presentations. So we are so grateful to have you on the team and to call you a friend and to know that you are personally invested as well. I think that that really makes a transformative impact on what we are doing as a foundation. So thank you very much for the information. Thanks for all the hard work that you put into the Rett Research Ready program and the continued refinements that we can expect from this tool, which to me is incredible, right? We just discovered the gene in 1999. We were part of the first trial in 2010, which was a single drug at a single site. And here we are in 2020, just 10 years later, with multiple trials, multiple sites involving multiple countries. And although the majority of our work does occur in the United States, we are partnered with organizations around the world and with drug companies who are also operating around the world to make sure that everybody, male, female, young, old, regardless of your geography, can have a chance to participate in research. To every family who's with us today, I want to thank you for even attending the webcast today, to consider putting yourself and your family in the position of participating in research. We raise money, we raise awareness, we advocate, we dream, we hope, but we know it's a very different thing to actually commit to putting yourself into that participant seat. And we hope that the tools that we've made available to you will help you envision participating in the process, because that progress cannot move forward without actual enrollment from our kids. And through the My Trial Finder tool, you can begin to experience research by participating in surveys, by enrolling in the natural history study. And that's well before even doing a trial drug with your child. So we hope you know that there's many avenues and many ways that you can participate, and we'll continue to bring those to you. Okay, as part of our continuing education with Rett syndrome, we've committed to monthly RettEd webcasts. So on November 10th, we invite you to come back and hear more about these beautiful communication guidelines. Now that they've been on the market for about 6 months, we are going to have one of our authors join us and give us more of an overview on the communication guidelines and how you can put them into practice in your life. And we're going to hear from some people who have had a chance to do so, both parents and everyday SLPs and AACs who are not Rett syndrome experts, but have a client with Rett syndrome, and how the guidelines have helped them in their life. So you can sign up for that next RettEd webcast on our website. And then following in December, I'm sorry, we've got the name mixed up here. It's not communication guidelines. We're going to talk about vision in Rett syndrome with Tristan Dinkel, who is with the University of Colorado Children's Hospital in Denver. Now, we talk a lot about vision in CDKL5, and we know the incidence of CVI, cortical visual impairment, in CDKL5, but we haven't talked about it much in Rett syndrome. So we're going to hear some of the first information of studies and data in terms of what do our children see. This is important in terms of their sensory processing, as well as plays into AAC assessments for eye gaze devices. So I hope you join those two RettEd webcasts. And you also visit rettsyndrome.org for families education to look at our entire digital library of past episodes and sessions. Those are available to you free. And take a look at them. If you have questions from any of those sessions, let me know. If you have other topics that are on your mind and you'd like to see us put them into our 2021 calendar, now's the time. Please take the survey at the end of our webcast today. We're going to ask you to take a brief survey right at the end of the webcast, or it will come in the recording link that you'll receive tomorrow. And it's not just any survey. We read every answer that you enter about how we're doing with these RettEd webcasts and what topics you'd like to see. So I'm going to put in that plug. I hope you answer that survey. You can reach me anytime at pnuez@rettsyndrome.org. And Dr. Pichard, all of us, our board of directors, our staff, we thank you for your engagement. We thank you for your support. We hope you are all well. We know that there are many, many things competing for our time and our energy right now. And I hope that this session has helped you refocus and recenter that the world is still turning, that we are making great progress, and there's so much hope to be had. And a lot of it is because you have contributed, you have participated. No one of us is as smart as all of us together. Keep answering your questions, keep engaged. Keep raising awareness for October Rett Syndrome Awareness Month, and we'll see you here again next month in November to hear about the communication guidelines. Dr. Pichard, thank you for your time, and we hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon, evening, or morning, depending on where you are on the globe. Thanks so much. I'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you for inviting me to be here, and thank you for everyone for submitting questions and for listening.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks.